Welcome everyone to the continuing webinar series with the Kawartha Sexual Assault Center. Today we are going to be talking about making your group or your space more trauma informed. So we're just going to start by introducing the facilitators that are here today. My name is Alicia Fisher. I'm the Prevention Education Supervisor with the Kawartha Sexual Assault Center. And we have Lucas.
Hi everyone, my name is Lucas Schaefer, and I'm the Mending Program Coordinator at the Kawartha Sexual Assault Center. Courtney, would you like to go next?
Yeah, my name is Courtney, and I am a student placement at Kawartha Sexual Assault Center. I am in the Mental Health and Addiction and Social Service program at Fleming College, and I'm very excited to be here with you all today.
Amazing. Okay, so let's get into it. Here we go. All right, trauma-informed and group spaces. Now this is geared more towards grades 7 through 12. So what we're going to be talking about today is who we are at the Kawartha Sexual Assault Center. We're going to be talking about what is trauma-informed and why is trauma-informed and having a trauma-informed approach important to your space and the group that you are a part of, and how can we make those groups and spaces more trauma-informed, and then wrap things up. So who we are at the Kawartha Sexual Assault Center, we are located in Peterborough, Ontario. We support the catchment areas of Kawartha Lakes, Haliburton, and Northumberland, and we support all genders and identities of individuals who have been impacted by sexual and gender-based violence. We offer individual counseling as well as group counseling, which can be anything from expressive arts and journaling to more psychoeducational programs like how trauma impacts the brain. Not only do we support the individuals who are impacted by sexual violence, but we also support their supporters as well. We also have services such as accompaniment, advocacy, and peer support. So if you are accessing court services or thinking about making a report to police or going to the hospital, or even if you're an educator and you're wanting a member of the KSAC team to be there to help support a student, we have those capabilities. Just contact our center. On the other side of things, we also have prevention education and public education. There is where we talk to high school students or elementary school all the way through high school, college, university students, as well as various sports teams and a variety of community spaces. We also have a 24/7 crisis support line. So that is through text, phone, and web chat, and those supports will be just at the end of the presentation. In the meantime, if you want to check those out, you can head on over to kawarthasexualassaultcenter.com. We also have a male ally program, which Lucas, if you wanted to talk briefly about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Alicia. So the Mending program that I coordinate at Kawartha Sexual Assault Center is, as Alicia was talking about, a male ally leadership program that engages men in ending gender-based violence. And how we do that is through this awesome multi-session program where we talk about what is gender-based violence and what does it look like in our society, and then talk about what it means to be a man and how certain aspects of what we refer to as toxic masculinity can influence and interact with gender-based violence. Then we talk about what is consent and what are healthy relationships. And then we talk about the ways in which we can use that knowledge to interrupt and end gender-based violence in their everyday lives through bystander intervention training. Then at the end of the program, we teach the participants the program to continue their education by facilitating the program, by going out in the community, just like we are now, and bringing that knowledge to as many people as possible.
Awesome, great. So let's get the presentation rolling here. So now we're going to talk about what does being trauma-informed mean and why is that important? So Courtney, would you mind reading the slide here about trauma-informed approaches?
Sure. So being trauma-informed is an approach that assumes that an individual is more likely than not to have a history of trauma. A trauma-informed approach recognizes the presence of trauma symptoms and acknowledges the role that trauma can play in an individual's life.
Mm-hmm. And so we're going to be talking about two specific forms of trauma, but trauma can really mean a variety of things and can impact people very, very differently. What may seem like a bad day to one person can be totally traumatizing for another. And so, as we say, trauma does not have to equal trauma, right? Trauma can be a single experience, or it can be enduring and repeated events, or it can be one huge catastrophe, right? what trauma does is that it overwhelms the individual's ability to cope, to heal, and to even like navigate their own thoughts and emotions in regards to that experience, right? And so these incidents of trauma can really take a very serious emotional toll on individuals, even if it didn't cause physical damage, right? So we can be emotionally impacted by something that we see or something that we experience or even something that we hear about. And this has a profound impact on our identity and who we are. This can result in a variety of negative effects, but ultimately it impacts our mind, body, soul, and spirit, right? So trauma can really be a variety of experiences, and that you don't have to break your arm or scrape your leg to experience trauma. Trauma can really impact our brain and our mental health. Lucas, did you have anything to add about trauma?
I think just emphasizing what you've already said, right? Like that it's it affects us in a very holistic way. In every aspect, trauma affects us, not just in mental health or physical health. It's the whole thing. So other than that, I don't have anything else to add.
What about gender and trauma? Does it discriminate against one gender over another?
I think speaking from a male perspective, I think men have a really hard time reaching out and really being vulnerable and seeking professional help for things that they might deem. Yeah. I think there's a lot of things about being a man, right? Like I don't want to take too much time up, but like men might not be able to interpret things as traumatic experiences, just like you were saying. They might be more ready to interpret it as just a bad day or I can tough this out kind of thing, and also that that less likelihood to reach out to different supportive services that they might need. Yeah, that's what I could imagine.
And it's kind of as if like and men, but there's also like a lot of people who just think, well, maybe I should just not deal with it and just like, oh, it's not a big deal, and they kind of suppress, right? And then all of a sudden it just sits there and festers in their body. Courtney, do you have anything to add talking about trauma?
Yeah. So, like you said earlier, too, like something that can be traumatic for one person may not be traumatic to another, and vice versa, right? So, a lot of people, like you were saying too, Lucas, like men have a hard time reaching out, possibly, and that could be for anyone too, right? Like Alicia was saying, suppress those thoughts. So, if you see something as maybe too small to be trauma, but for you, that could be traumatic. It might not be traumatic to someone else, but it could be for you. So if you have those feelings, it's important to recognize them, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like they may not think, oh, it's not that big of a deal. My friend's not reacting to it, so I shouldn't have to worry about it, right? So yeah. Mm-hmm. So trauma, no matter how big or small, can really impact us, and so it's really important to reach out. So as I said, we're going to be talking about two different forms of trauma. Now, trauma can come in all different shapes, sizes, and forms, but we're going to be talking about ACE scores. So this is adverse childhood experiences and sexual violence specifically. So Lucas, do you mind reading the slide here?
Absolutely. So what we deem as an adverse childhood experiences are potentially traumatic events that occur within childhood, so from 0 to 17 years of age. And what we're going to be talking about today is how adverse childhood experiences have a tremendous impact on future violence victimization and perpetration, as well as lifelong health, both mental health and physical health effects, and also opportunities that you have available to you. Like, not like we're going to be going into it very soon, but not only are adverse childhood experiences prevalent, but they also affect us in really, really significant ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And so this is just a brief kind of look at different types of adverse childhood experiences that that this particular study looks at. So it looks at experiencing or witnessing physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, and the numbers that we see in Canada is that 1 in 5 people, children actually experience this, right? Physical neglect or emotional neglect, mental illness, a relative being incarcerated, your mom being treated violently, substance abuse, and divorce. So you can kind of go through and look at these, and maybe you're even thinking to yourself, ooh, oh, that's me. Ooh, that's me. Ooh, that's me as well. But where did this all kind of come to? And so when we experience childhood adverse experiences, there's a variety here. Now, I stole this slide from our training manual, but there's a couple here that I just want to highlight as to how that's going to impact your groups and your spaces. So maybe Courtney, do you want to read through some of these specific ones that I've kind of highlighted here?
Yeah, sure. So if, you know, you fall in that category of the abuse that we were talking about in the past there, the adverse childhood experiences, that can have a lasting impact on you. So you could find yourself having a deep lack of trust in everyone. Feelings can be like they're shut off or shut down, inaccessible. You have, less access to your emotions, less access to your feelings. You could disassociate from stressful situations, have a difficulty attaching to others, negative self-image, and a low self-esteem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so like these are things that we can think about when we see someone who is kind of doesn't seem like they're all there, right? So when we think about trauma and how that has impacts on an individual, we can maybe see these in a couple people. Now, I'm not saying that someone who experiences childhood sexual abuse is going to experience these, but they have a heightened risk of experiencing some of these aspects. And so some of the symptoms now, these are kind of things that end up showing up in adulthood, but there's a couple here I just want to highlight. So things like missed work. Now, this may not be totally relevant to you as a student, but think about missing meetings, right? As a symptom of this adverse childhood experience. We can look at depression, suicide attempts, and a variety of health issues as well, right? And so how do we kind of come together to support those individuals? Now, you've probably gone through and maybe made some check marks yourself and are looking into this, but how common are these, right? So within the survey that looked at adults and seeing how many adverse childhood experiences they had, 61% reported at least one type of adverse childhood experience, right? 61%, that's a large portion of the population. And nearly 1 in 6 reported that they had experienced 4 or more types of ACEs. So 4 or more types of these, right? That's a lot. And so, Lucas, I know you have some stats there. Can you talk about if you have 4 or more types of adverse childhood experiences, what's the result of that?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Alicia. So keeping in mind that taking the study and looking at it, we can think of 6 people that we know and know that at least one of those people statistically is going to have experienced 4 or more types of adverse childhood experiences, right? But keeping that in mind, these ACE scores are really valuable because they're really predictive of different mental health and physical health challenges that people can face later in life. And some of those are chronic pulmonary lung disease, which increases by 390% if you have 4 or more ACEs, right? And with hepatitis, you are more likely, your likelihood of contracting hepatitis increases by 240%, right? And with depression, your likelihood increases to 560%. And if you have 4 or more ACEs, your likelihood of having attempted suicide goes up by 1,220%. So these are really powerful and predictive. This is a really powerful and predictive factor that we need to keep in mind, as well as how many people that we see at least having 1, and also people that are going to be having 4 or more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And so when we looked at the research, almost 29% had witnessed or experienced some form of sexual abuse as a child. 27% witnessed or experienced substance abuse, so watching a parent struggle with that. 24% have experienced some form of parental separation. And that can really have an emotional impact on a child, right? 20% witness or experience sexual abuse. And so when you think about how these problems are so pervasive and how it impacts so many people. It's almost like 1 in 3, 1 in 5, 1 in 4 for the numbers that are here. That's at least one ACE score, right? So it's really important to think about how these scores then impact people's behaviors and the symptoms that they see. So now we're going to kind of dive in a little bit to sexual abuse. Is this even relevant for young people? And so this was a study that came out by the CBC in October 2019, and it is quite eye-opening. So what the CBC did, they interviewed about 4,000 students across Canada. So this is a Canadian statistic, 2019. And these were people in between the ages of 14 and 21. And they answered questions about school-related, physical, verbal abuse, as well as sexual harassment and assault. And they were asked to reflect on their experiences from kindergarten through grade 12, so people just like you. And what they found is that 15% of female respondents said that they had a sexual act forced upon them. And this is something that was forced. Like, this isn't even diving in deeper to understand, have experience. Like, this is something that was forced upon them. And that includes like oral sex or being forced to touch someone inappropriately, right? And so in a class of about 20 students, that's about 3 in 20. When we look at the male side of the population, 9% said that they've been sexually assaulted by a peer. That is about 1 in 10, or here it says 2 in 20. These are experiencing sexual violence is something that is not only prevalent, but has lasting impacts, right? And so when we think back to how childhood sexual violence has these long-lasting effects of not being able to connect with emotions, feeling a low sense of self-esteem, and having a difficulty attaching to others, this is 1 in 10 males and 3 in 20 females. And this was just a study by 4,000 students, right? Courtney, do you have any response to this?
Yeah, I'm just thinking of the wording. So had a sexual act forced upon them. So that's, like you were saying, something forced. So it would be interesting, you know, like the stats for like a sexual assault for females, right? Like, I wonder how much larger that is. And you know, we know that it's hard to be honest about these things, right? So I wonder too if this number is larger. Lucas, I bet you can touch on like the male side of that, right? So being a male and openly admitting to something like this, it can be scary, right? So I wonder how right these statements are. I wonder if they are larger, right? Because this is a huge amount, but it is so common in the world today, and it is like, it has lasting impacts on us, that, you know, what we were talking about earlier, like the lifelong impacts that it can have on us, is just wild. Yeah. That's all I have.
Yeah, I'm actually going to skip ahead. And Lucas, you're going to talk about Trent students, because I have the Trent stats on here for university. So maybe Lucas, you can go into this one.
Absolutely, yeah. So this is the summary of a report of the student voice survey that was conducted in I think 2019. Yeah, and it also has really revealing results as well. So from this summary of the report, 68.9% of the people that responded reported experiencing sexual harassment. 81.7% witnessed sexual harassment or violence on campus. 28.1%, so that's almost 1 in 3, reported being stalked. And what the stalking might be like, what's this have to do with sexual violence? But we know that stalking is like a very, it might not seem like it's related to sexual violence and violence in general, because it's not physical in a way. You're kind of just, you're seeking out and kind of doing a lot of controlling and patrolling behavior. But we know that there's a link between stalking and people and perpetrators of stalk with murder and different kinds of violence that we see in there as well. So maybe Alicia can speak to that a little bit later. But,
No, I think, yeah, I was gonna say, I think you hit it right on nail on the head, because we always post what school we're going to, what residence we're in, what classes we're in, what program we're in. And so someone who's going to be wanting to perpetrate that now knows where you're going to be for the next 4 years. Or 2.
Yeah. And we also know that from this report that 30.6 reported non-consensual sex, meaning that around 1 in 3 students reported having been raped. And we can think of like 3 people that we know, and know that like if you go to Trent University, that you're going to have known someone who's experienced sexual violence or witnessed sexual violence or has been stalked, right? And that really kind of informs what we should do in light of this statistics, right? Like when we have this knowledge of how prevalent like sexual violence or these experiences are, what do we do about it? Let's talk about it.
Certainly. So what does being trauma-informed look like? So this is kind of like 6 key facets. And what I want you folks to do while I'm reading through these is think about, what could each of these look like within your group or within your space? So when we're talking about things being trauma-informed, we're thinking about safety. How are we keeping the space physically safe, but also emotionally safe for those involved? How do we create a level of trust, right? When we think about one of the behaviors or symptoms of adverse childhood experiences and sexual harm, it's this distrust for people and not wanting to attach. So how do we make a space that builds that trustworthiness and transparency? How do we foster a space that offers support, peer support? It's so easy to be like, okay, cool, go see the guidance counselor, go talk to someone. But how can you offer that support? And I think we had a really great webinar that talked about how to support a friend. Collaboration and mutuality, right? Yeah, did I say it right? Mutuality. How do we foster a place that is kind of like everyone's on the same playing field, right? Where everyone gets an input, everyone is able to collaborate in a way that empowers them and gives them the choice. And something else we have to keep in mind is a thing it's a great way to sum it up, calling it intersectionality. So thinking about cultural, historical, and gender issues, right? So how is it different for someone, a male interacting in a space versus a female, or someone who is trans or non-binary versus someone who has a disability, whether that be a cognitive disability or a physical disability? What about different cultural influences, right? And when people can access certain groups at certain times, because, for example, during Ramadan, right? Like we're not able to go to a space, we're not able to like eat food and stuff. So running like a pancake breakfast is not going to be knowledgeable of that. So thinking about these 6 things, how can they all come together? And so we've got a couple tips of what we can do to make our spaces and groups more trauma informed. So one thing that I want us to think about is that it's not the impact of our actions and behavior, the impact of our actions and behaviors and languages doesn't necessarily reflect our intent. So we may intend to have a trauma-informed space, but if someone in that space is not comfortable, is not happy, is not thriving, then that means that we need to reflect on how our actions are impacting people, right? It's one thing to say and one thing to kind of push back and be like, well, I tried, I worked really hard, but we have to think about what our actions, the impact of our actions. So how our actions and the things that we are saying are making other people feel, right? This all comes down to respect and being a good role model, right? Is that we're really listening to people when they're not happy with something, and that can be really hard. So when we utilize these more trauma-informed strategies, this can result in a more positive impact. Is it going to be perfect? Maybe not. But what we can do is think about these things on a much deeper level, right? Lucas, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, just that like if I was a facilitator and I wanted to set up a trauma-informed space, I would want to be really receptive to how people are feeling in that space, right? If someone's saying, hey, I'm not feeling comfortable because of XYZ, and I say, oh, well, actually, I've made the perfect trauma-informed space, and it's obviously something that's just wrong with you, like, that's not what I want to do as a facilitator. I want to make sure that people are able to learn and feel comfortable in my space. So that's just going to be kind of not focusing on my intentions of setting up the space and listening to the people that I'm speaking with.
Mm-hmm. Certainly. So how do we create our group to be more trauma informed? Now, these are just some points and things to think about, but we can certainly expand on this if you have a group and you're wanting a more in-depth presentation. But Courtney, maybe did you want to read through the first couple of points here?
Yeah, sure. So these are just how to make a trauma-informed group. So make sure that everyone, like as we said earlier, feels welcome, comfortable, their needs are being met. So if they tell you that they're, not comfortable with this and that, right? So you meet those needs, you limit those obstacles and barriers of entry. Like Alicia was saying, if it's Ramadan, you're not having a pancake breakfast. Ensuring that all voices are heard, and the variety of voting strategies, ways to get involved varies, so that it's not in favor of one person and not in another, because again, that could be a traumatic experience for someone.
I just want to talk about some of those earlier points.
Yeah.
So like, if someone isn't able to pack a lunch, or someone isn't able to eat, is there something that you can do, or maybe that you can communicate with the school about, is there an opportunity that we can have some granola bars here, or even just some sort of food that people can have here? So that way, if you don't have food, accessing this group is not going to be something that's going to limit that, right? And when I think about obstacles and barriers, I also think about, is this space accessible for people who have physical disabilities, right? Do you have stairs leading up to your space? Is a wheelchair, for example, going to be able to fit through a door? So how can you create a space that's welcoming? And when you talk about voting strategies, the voting strategies, is it anonymous? Is it raising your hand? Or do you have more vocal opportunities, right? So it's not about saying that like one's better than the other, but thinking about how can you ensure that everyone feels open and is able to communicate in ways that works for them. Sorry, Courtney, you want to continue?
Yeah, no, thank you, Alicia. That was great. Yeah. I think we were talking about like the active listening skills. So not just pretending that you're listening to everyone, but actually listening to everyone, getting involved in the conversation so that you can better understand each member of your group. Be compassionate and understand if someone cannot make a meeting or uphold their duties and assignments. We all have things going on in our lives, and I'm sure as a facilitator of a group, like there's an understanding that sometimes things don't get done, especially with adverse childhood experiences, right? We don't know what's going on at home. Yeah. We don't know what's going on in their own head. So really understanding that it could be a piece of trauma to not do this, not just, lazy or, other labels that youth usually get labeled as when they are showing signs of adverse childhood experiences. And then limiting hierarchies and unequal power dynamics. So I know as a facilitator of a group, I like to lower myself and be right there with the group. So not having that power dynamic of, I'm the leader and you're the youth in the group. Really become one and create a space where everyone's voices are heard.
And then the other point there, understanding and connecting folks to supports, and that's both within the school and outside of the school. So that could be something that on the first day of your group, or maybe even now, you're talking with your group about, okay, what kind of supports can we, a list of supports that we can think of that if people are needing that they can access, right? So Lucas, do you want to take us through the trauma-informed space?
Yeah, thank you so much. So as well as like what we can do as facilitators and co-facilitators and participants in the space to make it trauma-informed, there's also things we can do physically, right? We can make it a space accessible, and we can also make that space accessible emotionally. And what I think that would means is making sure that confidentiality, you're making the space like confidential, so that like things that are shared aren't being used outside of the space ill will. We're not sharing other people's stories. You're making sure that when someone's sharing something that you respect it by listening and not judging them they're being vulnerable to you, so we should respect that, as well as letting people feel like they're open, right? Like letting people feel like they can share their experiences so that a trauma-informed space can be a place of learning, right? And also offering a different variety of seating options, right? Not just having one kind of way to sit in a space, right? So that could look like having chairs, offering different like carpeted floors or bean bags, and also making sure that in that layout that everyone can be seen, right? So that we can keep as either a facilitator or a co-facilitator, that you can kind of keep in check like everyone that's in the space, making sure that you have a way to check in on people visually, right? And then having exits that are clearly marked and accessible, right? If someone needs to leave, either because they're feeling activated or they just need to take some time to themselves, that they know where the exits are and that they're able to access those exits, right? And also limiting noises that are unnecessary and loud, right? This can serve as distractions to the material that you're teaching, as well as something that takes someone out of the moment, right? We want to make sure that people in these spaces are able to attend to the material that they're here for, right? And having loud and unnecessary noises can activate different like traumatic memories that we were talking about before.
I think about, like the unnecessary part, like sometimes with like certain band groups or groups that like have musical instruments, like sometimes there may be times where, you know, the loud noises happen, right? But maybe just saying, okay, like, you know, all right, now we're going to be just warming up with our instruments. So kind of like maybe structuring it a little bit so that someone can prepare for a loud noise occurring. Obviously, we can't stop everything. Like if a fire alarm goes off, we can't be like, okay, stop the fire alarm, but like, you know, just limiting those excessive noises. So maybe having the door shut to avoid any unnecessary noise in a hallway, for example.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alicia. Having posters and handouts available and visible, right? So like this is the kind of resource piece that we were talking about before, making sure that people have like these things that they can take home and read over and use on their own time, as well as just like knowing that it's there and having them be visible, and having the same setup each time, right? We are creatures of habit and routine. So when something is familiar, you're going to be more comfortable in that space, right? If your classroom layout is changing every day, you're going to feel like a little bit like an astronaut landing on the moon every time. You're like, what planet's this, right? When you really just want the same planet every time. So you can have a trauma-informed space by making sure that that setup is the same every time, and people can know what to expect. And then having natural light and greenery in nature photos. Psychology tells us that spending time in nature and being outside and having green spaces like improves our mental well-being and physical well-being, like so much so that I can't get into it right now. But that's an awesome point to keep a trauma-informed space, is having natural light, greenery, and nature photos.
Definitely. So what did we learn today? We learned a lot. We learned that being trauma-informed is understanding that trauma is prevalent, right? We're looking especially at adverse childhood experiences and sexual violence. It impacts a lot of different lives in very different ways, right? And so being trauma-informed is thinking about safety, trust, that peer support, collaboration, empowerment, choice, and it's being intersectional, right? Understanding that we are all different human beings and that we all come from a variety of different experiences, and how we interact in the world is going to be different from one person to the next. And having groups and spaces that are more trauma-informed can enhance the quality of our group or the quality of our space, as well as our connection to each other, right? So it really gives a level of resiliency, a level of comfort that where people can really thrive. And that's what we want people to do, right? We want our club, we want our space to be the best that they could be, where people can thrive. And so if you are an educator, we would appreciate if you would fill out the survey that is attached in the email. Any and all feedback is super important. As I mentioned at the beginning of our presentation, we do have a variety of 24/7 crisis supports. So whether that's over the phone, our text line, or our web chat, these are all available 24/7. On our website, kawarthasexualassaultcenter.com, not only can you get access to that support, but you can also get access to a variety of services that we offer, as well as our social media accounts. Well, come back here. There we go. Awesome. I want to thank Lucas and Courtney so much for coming in today and sharing your knowledge.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alicia. This was absolutely awesome. Yeah.
It was great to be here. Thank you.
And thank you all so much for joining, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Take care.